Imagine waking up one day and realizing your favorite outfit could get you fined, jailed, or even accused of witchcraft. Sounds ridiculous, right? But throughout history, people were punished for wearing purple, for shaving the wrong way, or even for looking too fashionable. Some governments banned heels because they feared rebellion, and others outlawed lipstick because they thought it summoned demons. Today, we're diving into 50 absurd, bizarre, and unbelievable clothing and beauty laws that will make you question how humanity ever survived fashion. Ready? Let's begin. In 15th century England, wearing luxury fur wasn't just fashion, it was a legal hierarchy. Only royals and nobles could wear ermine, sable, or fox. Commoners wearing these materials could be fined heavily or publicly shamed. The law wasn't about warmth or style, it was about reminding everyone exactly where they belonged. One wrong coat meant you weren't just breaking rules, you were challenging the social order. Imagine being arrested today because your jacket looked too elite. That's how absurd it was. In colonial Massachusetts, 1600s, bright clothing was considered sinful vanity. The Puritan government passed laws banning flashy buttons, dyed fabrics, lace, and decorative trims. If you wore vivid colors or anything excessively adorned, you could face fines or be dragged before a religious court. The idea was simple. Looking too good meant you were spiritually corrupt. Fashion became evidence of moral failure. A bright coat could brand you as arrogant, rebellious, and ungodly. In their eyes, modesty wasn't a suggestion. It was the law. During the Heian era in Japan, certain shades of purple were reserved exclusively for nobles and the imperial family. The color wasn't just a style choice, it represented sacred authority and spiritual lineage. Wearing noble purple without rank could lead to punishment, social exile, or confiscation of clothing. The laws weren't written out of fashion control, but to protect hierarchy encoded into color. To wear purple illegitimately was equal to impersonating royalty. It wasn't just illegal, it was considered disrespect toward the emperor's divine position. In 1930s Italy under Mussolini, women were discouraged and sometimes punished for wearing trousers because the regime believed pants symbolized rebellion against traditional femininity. Fashion police patrolled public spaces, and women wearing pants could be fined, forced to change, or publicly humiliated. Mussolini viewed clothing as a tool for controlling identity and obedience. Pants represented danger, independence, masculinity, defiance. Ironically, wartime women later wore trousers to survive, work, and rebuild Italy. But for those years, fabric on the wrong legs was treated like political resistance. In France, during the 18th century, wearing extravagant wigs larger than 12 inches could result in legal penalties. Authorities claimed oversized hairstyles caused fire hazards, blocked visibility in public streets, and encouraged social chaos. But truthfully, the restriction was about class jealousy. The aristocracy didn't want commoners imitating their grand powdered hair towers decorated with feathers, jewels, and miniature sculptures. Fashion became warfare. One extra inch of wig wasn't style, it was territory. Too tall and you weren't merely tacky, you were unlawful. In South Korea, until the late 1980s, women's skirt lengths were regulated by moral policing teams. If a skirt was considered too short, typically above the knee, officers could stop, measure, and fine the wearer. The government claimed short skirts threatened public decency and national discipline, but the real motive was surveillance and control. Clothing became evidence of loyalty or rebellion. Today, South Korea leads global fashion trends, but only decades ago, a few inches of fabric could make someone a criminal. In sumptuary laws of medieval Spain, commoners were banned from wearing silk, gold embroidery, or precious stones. These materials were reserved for nobility and the royal court. If someone wore forbidden fabrics, the government could confiscate the clothing on the spot and fine them heavily. The law wasn't about fashion. It reinforced class divides that could be seen instantly from a distance. Silk wasn't just fabric. It was a visual passport. Without the right birthright, wearing silk made you legally an impersonator. In Switzerland during the 16th century, laws controlled even the number of decorative slashes allowed on garments. These fabric cuts exposed layers underneath and were a popular trend. But authorities believed too many slashes displayed arrogance, wealth, or sinful flamboyance. If someone exceeded their permitted number, their clothing could be cut apart by officials in public. The rule was bizarrely specific. Buttons, sleeves, and fabric openings were counted like financial assets. One extra slash didn't make you stylish, it made you a criminal. In ancient Egypt, only priests and royalty were allowed to wear leopard skin garments, particularly ritual cloaks. These weren't fashion accessories, they symbolized sacred authority and spiritual dominance over chaos. Wearing leopard patterns without religious rank could lead to exile, imprisonment, or execution. Even replicas were forbidden. The restriction wasn't superficial. Egyptians believed the pattern carried mystical, protective energy, so clothing became power. A fabric wasn't just cloth, it was magic, reserved only for those chosen by gods, not by fashion preference. In the Ottoman Empire, shoe colors were assigned based on social rank. Yellow shoes were exclusively for Jewish citizens, black for Muslims, and red for Christians. Anyone wearing the wrong color could be punished, fined, or accused of disrespecting the Sultan's order. Footwear became identity, religion, and hierarchy combined into one rule. You couldn't simply choose a color because you liked it. Every step you took publicly announced who you were allowed to be. Shoes weren't fashion, they were a legal label. In New Zealand during the early 1900s, men were legally forbidden from wearing Cardin-style feathered hats after European lawmakers decided such accessories were too feminine. Anyone caught wearing extravagant feathers risked public ridicule, fines, or the hats being confiscated. Authorities claimed they were protecting masculinity and social order, yet fashion historians believed the law was rooted in insecurity, not morality. A single feather became dangerous because it blurred gender expectations. Clothing wasn't fabric, it was proof of identity, and deviation meant breaking the social script. In 19th century Russia, peasants were banned from wearing Western-style clothing because the Tsar feared fashion might inspire rebellion and independence. Tailored coats, lace collars, and European shoes were restricted. If a commoner wore clothing resembling aristocratic style, authorities could strip the garments publicly and impose harsh penalties. Russia weaponized clothing to ensure class recognition from first glance. The law wasn't just about appearance, it was psychological control. Looking modern was treated like political defiance, and a fashionable coat could mark someone as a dangerous thinker. In Scotland, during the Dress Act of 1746, wearing traditional Highland tartan, kilts, or clan colours became illegal after the Jacobite uprising. Anyone caught wearing tartan could face prison, forced labour, or corporal punishment. The ban wasn't about fashion, it was cultural erasure. Lawmakers believed clothing united resistance, so they tried to outlaw identity itself. The kilt wasn't fabric, it was rebellion. Being seen in clan colors turned you into a walking declaration of loyalty, and for nearly 40 years a pattern could cost your freedom. In Mexico during the 19th century, Women in some regions were banned from cutting their hair short because long hair symbolized modesty, purity, and obedience. Short hair was associated with rebellion, masculinity, and independence. Authorities argued women with cropped hair threatened traditional order. Punishments ranged from church discipline to legal penalties. The law wasn't about aesthetics. It regulated gender roles. Hair wasn't seen as personal, it was public symbolism. A haircut could determine whether a woman was considered respectable, suspicious, or revolutionary. In Boston, USA, 1651, lipstick became legally punishable when Puritan leaders announced that women who seduced men through painted lips could be tried for witchcraft. Authorities believed makeup altered God's natural design and allowed women to manipulate reality. If a man claimed he'd been tricked into marriage because of cosmetics, the woman could face trial. Lipstick wasn't beauty, it was sorcery in the eyes of lawmakers. One swipe of color was enough to rewrite fate, break trust, and summon legal consequences. In Samoa, it is still illegal to forget your spouse's birthday, and surprisingly, this originated from clothing-related disputes. Husbands who failed to give proper ceremonial garments or celebratory attire could be fined or publicly shamed. The law evolved, but its origin was rooted in garment responsibility and respect. Clothing symbolized love, memory, and duty. Forgetting meant failing one's role. What began as textile punishment eventually became emotional regulation. A missed celebration wasn't a mistake, it was legally recognized neglect. In Zimbabwe, during colonial rule, African citizens were restricted from wearing European suits unless they had government approval. The intention was clear: prevent Africans from appearing equal to European settlers. Fashion became a silent battlefield. A tailored suit could be seen as a threat to colonial power. Authorities feared fabric could challenge hierarchy. Clothing wasn't comfort, it was political weaponry. Being too dressed carried surveillance, suspicion, and sometimes arrest. A lapel pin or polished shoe became an act of defiance disguised as fashion. In Turkey during the 1920s, under Ataturk's reforms, traditional Ottoman turbans and Islamic religious garments were outlawed for civilians, and Western hats became mandatory for men. Violators could be fined, arrested, or imprisoned. Ataturk believed clothing determined mindset and modernization. A hat became the symbol of national transformation. The law wasn't small. It was cultural surgery. A single headpiece drew the border between Old Empire and New Republic. People weren't just changing fashion, they were forced to change identity. In Norway, during the 19th century, servants were legally banned from wearing clothing made from expensive fabrics like velvet or silk to ensure social classes remained visually separated. If a servant appeared too luxurious, employers could fire them, report them to authorities, or demand immediate confiscation of garments. Clothing functioned like a caste system badge. Even if a servant bought luxury clothing with their own money, law invalidated their right to appear refined. Elegance wasn't earned. It was assigned by birth. In Bhutan, the Driglam Namza dress code still legally requires citizens to wear traditional clothing in government offices, schools, or formal public spaces. Men must wear the go and women the kira. Failure to comply can result in fines or official denial of services. The law was created to preserve identity against globalization, but its enforcement is strict. Clothing isn't personal, it's patriotic duty. A single outfit can define loyalty, respect, culture, and belonging, turning fabric into national symbolism. In Germany, during the 15th century, tailors were legally forbidden from making sleeves that were too wide or overly decorated. Extravagant sleeves, sometimes wider than a person's torso, were seen as social rebellion. Authorities worried that excessive fabric, embroidery, and cutouts encouraged arrogance and weakened moral values. If someone wore illegally wide sleeves, officials could literally cut them off in public as punishment. The sleeve became a status symbol and a battlefield. A few inches of fabric could determine dignity, shame, or legal trouble. In Indonesia's Aceh province, strict religious dress laws require women to wear hijab and modest clothing by enforcement, not choice. Violations can result in fines, public reprimands, or mandatory re-education sessions. Authorities sometimes use clothing checkpoints to inspect sleeves, hemlines, and head coverings. For many, fashion isn't expression, it's regulation. Clothing is treated as evidence of morality and obedience. One uncovered strand of hair becomes a legal violation rather than a personal choice. Identity, comfort, and style are secondary to religious law. In Renaissance France, only nobility were allowed to wear clothing embroidered with silver and gold thread. Commoners who tried to dress like aristocrats risked confiscation, fines, or imprisonment. The law wasn't about luxury, it was visual power. Gold embroidery symbolized divine approval and social dominance. Wearing it without status was treated like impersonating royalty. A simple thread wasn't decoration, it was authority, wealth, control, and privilege woven into fabric. One stitch could determine whether someone appeared honorable or criminal. In Sudan during the early 2000s, women could be arrested for wearing trousers under public morality laws. Dozens of cases saw women humiliated, whipped, or fined for immodest clothing. The law argued trousers erased femininity and encouraged rebellion. Clothing was used to police identity rather than protect it. A fabric choice became a legal battlefield between tradition and autonomy. A pair of pants wasn't simple, it was a statement, and the legal system treated it like a threat to cultural order. In Tudor England under Henry VIII, only royalty and high noble ranks were allowed to wear purple velvet or cloth of gold. Violating these sumptuary laws wasn't just disrespect, it was treason. Henry viewed fashion as a visual hierarchy, and purple became his personal color of divine authority. Wearing it without rank was seen as challenging his power. One garment could imply ambition, rebellion, or disrespect. Purple wasn't style, it was political territory guarded by punishment and fear. In North Korea today, citizens must follow government-approved hairstyles, and certain styles are banned entirely. Men and women are restricted to a limited catalog of state-approved cuts. Anything appearing Western, rebellious, or excessively expressive can result in warnings, punishment, or forced haircutting. Fashion becomes obedience. A human head is treated like a billboard for nationalism. Hair isn't just dead fiber, it's ideological signaling. A wrong style doesn't make you unfashionable, it makes you suspicious in the eyes of the regime. In Sweden during the 18th century, wealthy citizens were taxed specifically for wearing luxurious clothing, such as imported fabrics, lace, or jewelry. The government believed excess fashion threatened economic stability and morals. Tailors could be fined for creating garments deemed unnecessarily decorative. Clothing became a taxable vice, much like alcohol or gambling. The shimmering outfit didn't just cost money to buy, it cost money to legally exist in. Fashion itself became an ongoing financial punishment for those who wanted beauty. In Uganda, a controversial 2014 law made it illegal for women to wear miniskirts or clothing considered too revealing. Police often interpreted this subjectively, leading to harassment and public humiliation. Supporters claimed the law protected cultural values, while critics argued it weaponized morality against women's autonomy. A skirt length became a legal measuring stick for dignity. Clothing wasn't fabric, it was control. The line between acceptable and criminal existed not in inches but in interpretation. In Venice during the 1600s, authorities attempted to ban platform shoes called chopines, some exceeding 50 centimeters in height. Women wore them to display wealth and elegance, yet the shoes caused injuries, chaos in streets, and sometimes death from falling. Laws tried to limit shoe height, but elite women continued wearing them as rebellion and status flex. A shoe became political defiance wrapped in fashion. The higher the platform, the more powerful and legally dangerous the wearer appeared. In China during the Qing dynasty, the Q hairstyle, shaved front scalp with a long braided ponytail, was legally mandatory for men. Refusing it was considered rebellion and could lead to execution. The hairstyle symbolized loyalty to the emperor, not fashion. Cutting the braid was a political betrayal. Hair became a living leash, marking allegiance visibly, daily, unmistakably. The law wasn't style regulation. It was domination through appearance, forcing identity onto every citizen through a braid. In Ethiopia, during the reign of Emperor Menelik II, common citizens were forbidden from wearing lion manes, leopard skins, or ceremonial beadwork reserved for warriors and nobility. These garments symbolized spiritual strength and battlefield honor. Anyone wearing them without rank could face whipping, public humiliation, or confiscation. Clothing wasn't decoration, it was recorded achievement. Every textile represented courage, lineage, and earned power. Wearing elite garments without status wasn't just illegal, it was a cultural lie, a stolen identity stitched into fabric. In the Philippines during Spanish colonial rule, indigenous tattoo patterns and warrior body markings were banned because authorities believed they encouraged pride, independence, and rebellion. Tattoos weren't fashion, they were sacred storytelling, victory, lineage, bravery. The ban tried to erase identity through skin. Anyone caught tattooing or displaying warrior patterns could be punished or forced to cover them. Ink became contraband and skin became a battlefield for cultural survival. The law wasn't about modesty, it was about silencing memory written in flesh. In Italy's medieval city-states, women were legally limited in how many rings, pearls, and gemstones they could wear publicly. The laws argued excessive jewelry encouraged envy, vanity, and economic recklessness. Officials sometimes measured gemstone sizes during weddings or festivals to enforce compliance. Jewelry wasn't personal, it was regulated wealth signaling. A finger with one illegal ring wasn't glamorous, it was criminal evidence. The glitter of stones wasn't beauty, it was surveillance. Each jewel became proof of whether someone obeyed or challenged the hierarchy. In Iran, after 1979, strict dress codes were imposed, requiring women to wear hijab and modest clothing in all public spaces. Violations could result in fines, harassment, or arrest by morality police. Clothing transformed into a legal and political statement, whether intentionally or not. A loose scarf, colorful fabric, or visible hair strand could provoke punishment. Fashion became negotiation between identity, survival, and law. A simple outfit was no longer a choice. It was compliance or resistance woven in thread. In France, during the early 1700s, laws attempted to ban tall aristocratic wigs powdered with flour because they were draining the national grain supply. Bakers protested widely, claiming people were starving while nobility wore food on their heads. Officials threatened fines and public criticism, but elites resisted fiercely because wigs represented dignity and superiority. In the end, hairstyle wasn't banned, poverty was simply ignored. A hairstyle became proof of hierarchy so powerful that hunger itself couldn't change fashion. In Fiji, traditional chiefs historically restricted the wearing of certain patterned masi, bark cloth fabrics, because specific motifs represented authority, ancestors, and sacred land. Wearing them without permission wasn't disrespectful, it was spiritual violation. Punishments included public apology ceremonies or ritual penalties. The cloth wasn't clothing, it was sacred language. Each symbol carried power and memory. To wear reserved designs without status meant claiming a role you hadn't earned. Fashion and spirituality blended so deeply that one wrong pattern could disrupt social and ancestral order. In the United States during the 1940s, the War Production Board restricted skirt widths, fabric amounts, and even the number of pockets due to wartime rationing. Excess fabric was considered unpatriotic and wasteful. Manufacturers who violated regulations could lose business licenses or face fines. Clothing wasn't creativity, it was national responsibility. Your outfit revealed whether you supported the war effort. Simplicity wasn't a trend, it was required sacrifice, turning fashion into quiet obedience, stitched under necessity. In Saudi Arabia, strict public dress laws require women to wear abayas in many regions, and certain styles considered excessively fashionable can attract punishment or police harassment. Clothing isn't individual, it's collective expectation. Men also face restrictions against Western styles deemed inappropriate. Fashion becomes a boundary. Too modern and you are disrespectful. Too casual and you are improper. The abaya may be cultural, but its enforcement is legal. Fabric becomes regulation, not preference. In ancient Rome, only senators were allowed to wear togas with a purple border called latus clavus. Wearing one without rank was treated as political fraud. Purple dye was so expensive it symbolized authority, wealth, and divine approval. Clothing functioned like a legal stamp of power. If someone falsely wore senatorial attire, they could face imprisonment or public humiliation. A strip of purple thread wasn't fashion. It was government recognition stitched visibly onto the body. In Japan during the Edo period, merchants, despite being wealthy, were legally required to dress modestly in cotton or subdued colors, while samurai and nobility could wear silk and vibrant patterns. The government feared wealthy merchants might appear superior to higher-ranking classes. Some secretly lined coats with luxurious textiles hidden inside seams. Clothing restrictions sparked secret rebellion. Luxury hidden, never shown. Fashion became a silent protest, invisible yet deeply personal. In Australia during the 1920s, beach police patrolled shorelines measuring women's swimsuits. If a swimsuit was more than 6 inches above the knee, the woman could be fined, forced to cover up, or removed from the beach entirely. Authorities argued modesty protected morality, but the rule became a spectacle. Measuring tape replaced judgment. A single inch could determine whether a woman was seen as respectable or rebellious. Swimwear wasn't comfort or freedom. It was a legal battlefield marked by rulers and authority. In Hawaii, before U.S. annexation, Certain feather cloaks and helmets called ahula and mahiol were restricted exclusively to chiefs. These garments symbolized sacred lineage and divine authority. If someone without rank wore them, it wasn't fashion theft. It was cosmic disrespect. The feathers came from birds regarded as spiritual messengers, making the garments living symbols of leadership. Wearing one without permission could spark punishment or exile. The law wasn't about style, it was about preserving ancestry, power, and spiritual order woven feather by feather. In Singapore, chewing gum is famously restricted. But lesser known is that imported counterfeit designer clothing can result in heavy fines or imprisonment. The government treats intellectual property violations as threats to national order. Clothing becomes legal evidence of crime rather than personal expression. A fake luxury logo isn't harmless, it's treated like smuggling. Even fashion becomes part of law, economics, and identity. Wearing counterfeit branding can transform an ordinary shopper into a legal offender. Proving clothing can still carry unexpected consequences. In Belgium during the early 1900s, police attempted to ban corsets after doctors claimed they caused organ damage and moral weakening. Authorities believed tight lacing made women too concerned with physical beauty and too distracted from domestic roles. Some cities enforced fines for dangerously tight corsets. Clothing wasn't merely health, it was ideology. A garment that shaped the body became evidence of rebellion against expected behavior. A silhouette wasn't fashion, it was seen as a threat to discipline and social expectations. In Thailand today, it's illegal to publicly wear clothing with offensive or disrespectful images involving the monarchy. Thailand's lèse-majesté laws extend into fashion. A t-shirt isn't harmless, it's a legal statement. Even accidental disrespect can lead to fines or imprisonment. Clothing becomes political terrain, where fabric and printed symbols determine loyalty. A person's outfit can be interpreted as support, rebellion, or insult. In Thailand, you don't just choose clothing, you navigate a legal landscape stitched with consequence. In medieval England, shoemakers were restricted from creating shoes with excessively long, pointed toes, sometimes reaching over 24 inches. Authorities believed exaggerated footwear encouraged pride and disrupted walking in crowded markets. Those caught exceeding legal toe length could face fines or confiscation. Shoes weren't simply fashion, they were regulated posture and pride. A pointed toe wasn't playful. It was political disruption. Even feet became regulated territory, where a few inches of leather determined whether someone walked freely or broke the law. In Kenya, the 1980s saw public bans on men wearing long hairstyles and earrings, as government leaders argued such styles symbolized rebellion, Western influence, and moral decay. Police could forcibly cut men's hair or confiscate accessories. Fashion became evidence of disobedience. Hair wasn't personal, it was political and cultural alignment. A single earring could mark someone as suspicious, untrustworthy, or defiant in the eyes of authority. A style meant more than appearance. It determined whether a man belonged within the state's expectations. In Pakistan, public dress codes influenced by cultural and religious policy restrict revealing clothing, and wearing outfits considered vulgar can lead to fines, harassment, or removal from public spaces. The rule isn't strictly measured by inches, but by interpretation. Fashion becomes unpredictable judgment. A shirt that seems harmless one day may become socially condemned the next. Clothing isn't autonomy, it's negotiation between law, society, and identity, where every outfit risks triggering moral scrutiny. In Spain, during the Catholic Inquisition, Clothing could determine whether someone was suspected of being a heretic. Certain colors, fabrics, and styles associated with Jewish or Muslim identity were monitored, and those who appeared too different risked investigation or punishment. Clothing became survival strategy. Blending in could save a life. Fashion wasn't identity, it was camouflage. Every garment was chosen carefully because the wrong fabric could mean accusations, torture, or death. In England until 2015, it was technically illegal for women to wear trousers in Parliament, a forgotten relic law from the 19th century intended to enforce feminine dress codes. The rule survived long after society evolved, showing how strange and stubborn fashion laws can be. A simple pair of pants symbolized power, equality, and presence, yet the law resisted change for decades. Clothing wasn't fabric, it was an outdated barrier lingering until finally erased.